to the work session, March 8th, and I just want to apologize first and foremost. The exec committee was meeting with the exec committee of the REA, and I just want to apologize for the late start, 10 minutes late. But if you would please rise and just do the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we have the reading of the mission statement.
Richmond Community Schools guides students on pathways of learning to a future of limitless possibilities.
And the vision?
That's a tough act to follow. Vision statement. Richmond Community Schools, a collaborative community nurturing mind, body, and spirit to prepare students for lives of choice, purpose, and service.
All right, thank you guys. Just as a reminder, as the work session is a new format, I just want to point out that it looks a little bit different. Our intent is to be more approachable, for people to feel like, hey, you can come and be part of the conversation. That's why there's a seat up here, so you don't even have to stand at the scary podium with the microphone. It's just you're talking to us and you're part of the conversation. So what we'll be doing is we will be conversing amongst ourselves first, and that's the part where you're basically just listening and hearing, and then as thoughts and as you're hearing the conversation, as thoughts come up, as questions come up, jot them down or write them down, or if you can just remember them, that's awesome too. And then afterwards, we'll have a public commentary part. So what you would need to do for that is see this young lady over here, Kim, and you'd sign up for that. And you can decide at any time. You don't have to decide now. You don't have, you can decide at any time. Hey, I have a question. I have a comment, or whatever you want to say, as long as it's only. Well, I'll tell you what you can say. There are some rules, so to speak. So just then you can sign up with Kim and come talk to us. All right. So that's how that works. So to start us off, 2.01, we're going to be talking about the school calendar for 2023 and 2024 and building our proposal. Dr. Wright, would you like to lead us off?
Absolutely. President Stoltz, trustees, I'm going to ask that our Assistant Superintendent, Mrs. Don Santini, along with our Central Office Leadership Team that is here, present for us a proposal, the work session, calendar building our proposal. I'm not sure if, I believe our audience hopefully has had an opportunity to receive a copy of this, but nevertheless, Mrs. Santini, the floor is yours, along with our Central Office Leadership Team that has had a part in the school calendar proposal. So, Mrs. Santini.
Thank you, Dr. Wright and board and those in attendance this evening for this opportunity just to have further conversation regarding the calendar and building our proposal. As you know, at our last board meeting on February 22nd, we were tasked with going back to the education working group to develop surveys, to gather more input before any final decisions are made. And so tonight we plan to share some of the information that we've learned in the last 2 weeks so that we can continue to prepare for the upcoming board meeting. When we met on the 27th in the education working group, there were really 4 key takeaways. The first was that we needed to get a better pulse on the key measures by distributing surveys and then also having those results to share with you this evening. The second was to review any correspondence that any of our board members or cabinet team had received, and also rewatching the commentary from the last board meeting in order to reflect on different things that were shared. We also invited those members of the calendar committee to the work session this evening. And then lastly, I'll just share with the survey results. As of today at 9 a.m., we had 308 staff surveys that had been submitted and 421 community surveys. So the information that you received via email yesterday with Dr. Wright has been somewhat updated, and what you have in front of you is the most current data.
And just and everybody has that.
Yes, there should be handouts in the back if you do not have one, but there is a proposal, and then we also copied the calendar separate.
Thank you.
So the first thing that I'd like to start with this evening is just to revisit the challenges that presented themselves as we worked through the calendar. to bring clarity. So the first challenge was professional development. So our current issues included low growth and student achievement, limited time for teacher collaboration, and the ability to differentiate for content areas in grades 5 through 12, need for supervision during morning teacher collaboration in our elementary buildings, limited teacher collective efficacy, and approximately 33% of all of our teaching staff are probationary teachers in their first 2 years of teaching. So as a result of those current issues, what we are charged to do is come up with some sort of option that would provide a remedy. And so our one option could be to dedicate 45 minutes daily to include a staff meeting once per week, cluster or teacher collaboration once per week, supervision responsibilities once per week, and then teacher preference 2 times per week. So that would be the total of 5 days. So that was the first challenge, was professional development. The second challenge was supervision. The current issue with supervision is the need for additional supervision before and after school. We have a limited number of elementary paraprofessionals to cover breakfast in the classroom, to cover for morning cluster. Our contractual hours are 5 to 10 minutes before or after student arrival and dismissal in grades 5 through 12. Late buses cause interruption to daily instruction, and late buses also leave students in grades 5 through 8 in the gym with limited supervision. So an option would be to embed that time for teacher supervision before and after school on a rotating basis. So not every day would a teacher be expected to supervise, but on a rotating basis throughout the week, both arrival and dismissal. So that was challenge number 2. The third challenge was transportation. And the current issues with transportation are late arrival and dismissal of buses at our secondary buildings. Currently, both Dennis and RHS start at 8:15 and dismiss at 3:30. That then requires supervision issues due to the waves of buses arriving. And then lastly, on-time parent pickup at bus stops. And this is for K1. When those parents aren't there, that causes those routes to return back to the elementary, delaying the secondary routes. So some of the options that we looked at were restructuring the routes and sweeping the district and then dropping at Test, and then 15 minutes later dropping at Dennis. Another option is to stagger our arrival and dismissal times into 2 tiers. And so the way I look at this is the entire fleet of buses does tier 1 elementary delivery. Then that fleet for tier 2 divides into 2 routes, which has to be 1 hour after the elementary. The way those 2 fleets could work is one doing all of the RHS bus routes, and then the other doing all of the intermediate, middle, and high school routes. Within those 3 routes, there has to be 15 minutes to ensure on-time delivery. And then CYS is its separate route. And then lastly, the option is to communicate the importance of timeliness parent pickup. So those were the 3 challenges that presented themselves, the current issues that we are facing, and possible options. Now we move into the staff survey results. As I mentioned, we had 308 staff respond to the survey, and we have some of those key questions included in this presentation. The first question worth exploring is, how will your instruction be affected if our daily start and end times reduce the number of overall minutes? And you can see 1 is not affected at all, 5 is affected greatly. And so our staff, 40.9%, scored 1 or 2, meaning that their instruction would not be affected or limited very little, compared to 38.6% in the category of 4 or 5, 5 being impacting greatly your instruction. The second question here is, do you respond better to professional development before or after school? And we had 51.6% prefer afternoon professional development and 25.3% prefer morning professional development. On inclement weather days, what is your preference? And we had 41.6% prefer asynchronous instruction. We had 27.6% prefer synchronous instruction, and then 21.4% prefer making up those days in person. Just a reminder that currently we are only allowed 3 days of asynchronous instruction. The second question here is, what is your preference for winter break? And 78.9% prefer 10 days for winter break. So those were 4 of the key questions that were asked in the staff survey. Next is a survey question from our instructional coaches and principals. We surveyed 19 and we asked them, would you rather have PD next year 45 minutes before school or 45 minutes after school? The reason we asked this question is because those are our leaders in the building that are providing professional development. 47.4% said that either time works. 31.6% preferred before school, and 21.1% preferred after school. Up next is the community stakeholder survey results. Again, we received 421 results. The first question stated, what time works best for you to drop your child off at school? Starting with 11.4% at 7:15 a.m., 14.5% at 7:30 a.m., 20% at 7:45 a.m., 23.8% at 8 a.m., and then you can see in the purple is the 8:15 and the blue is 8:30. The second question, what factors affect your morning commute? Mostly work schedule at 55.3%. None was 18.5%. They have the flexibility within their schedule. And then 16.2% is sibling drop-off. On a scale of 1 to 5, how has the early dismissal impacted your schedule? Again, 1 not affected at all, 5 affected greatly. You'll see that 48.2% stated that the early dismissal did not have any impact on them, and 9.5% said it affected them greatly. The second question here, on inclement weather days, what is your preference? We had 43.2% prefer asynchronous instruction, 33% that we make up those days in person, and 19% of our community preferred synchronous instruction. Moving on into the calendar, and you also have a copy of that separate from your presentation that's larger if you prefer that. The first day of school for students would be August 7th, and the last day of school would be May 23rd. Of note would be 5 days at fall break of vacation, 3 days at Thanksgiving break, 10 days at winter break, and 5 days at spring break. There would be no school on parent-teacher conference day, and we currently have two possible built-in inclement weather days that could be used. I will note that when we extended the winter break to 10 days, we added those 2 days in August, and so I had to redistribute evenly the number of days in each grading period. So that was a change to make sure that those were more evenly distributed in semester 1. Just a reminder, we have 180 student days and 186 teacher days on this calendar. We did leave in the teacher work days on August 3rd and on January 4th. And then there were also 2 professional development days on August 4th for teachers and on January 5th. This is our current student/teacher day. So I thought it would be important to revisit the time that our teachers arrive and leave, as well as when our students arrive and leave, and then the instructional minutes. On the right-hand side is the current professional development model. So at the elementary level, we currently have what we call cluster or professional learning for our teachers from approximately 7:15 to 8 a.m. once per week. We also have Tuesday early dismissal from 2 to 2:45. So there are 2 opportunities weekly at the elementary level. At the intermediate level, we have cluster or that professional learning with teachers during the prep in place of Tuesday early dismissal, and that is 3 times per month, 1 Tuesday per month from 3 to 3:30. They still have they have professional development during that early dismissal. And the reason we looked at this model at test is because it was hard to differentiate for the different content areas. And so the instructional coach and building leaders felt and came to agreement with their building association that they would use that time during prep, which then would allow them to have that Tuesday early dismissal 3 times per month for their own planning. So they would attend during that prep, which would guarantee them time just to focus with a certain content area. So that's at the intermediate level at grades 5, 6. At the middle level, which would be 7, 8, they currently have professional development once per week, all staff from 3 to 3:30. And then in the master schedule, they were able to create a second block of time. So in addition to the teacher prep, a second block of time for the language arts and math teachers in order to get professional development. For the math teachers, that is 2 days per week for professional development. The other 2 days are used for bulldog time, which is their intervention. It is 4 days per week for language arts. So as you can see at the intermediate and middle level, we've attempted to do some provided some different options in order to cater to those different content areas. At the high school level, they have Tuesday early dismissal for all staff from 3 to 3:30. So this is the current student teacher day. You see that our students at the elementary start at 7:50, test starts at 8, dentist starts at 8:15 along with RHS, Hibbard starts at 8:28, and CYS currently starts at 7:30. The next slide shows the instructional guidance from the Department of Education. So the school year, we are required to have 180 days. And within those instructional days, for grades 1 through 6, we must have 5 hours of instructional time. For grades 7 through 12, at least 6 hours of instructional time. So as we began to look at the contractual day and the amount of instructional time, these were the guidelines that we used as a minimum. Based on feedback, commentary, we have continued to revise and provide additional options in order to meet the challenges and the current issues. And so this evening, we have 2 options that we would like to discuss. The first option is for morning professional development. So we will start there. What you will notice is we heard from the Hibbard staff and families and community that the start of 9:20 proposed in the last schedule was too late and was difficult for not only working parents but also the concern with athletics. And so we have tried to work within our means of transportation to restructure the day. In doing so, that start time for our elementary would be 7 a.m., but that does put all of our start times for students before 9 a.m. The last start time would be 8:45 at Dennis. And if you remember back to transportation, we have to have 1 hour between tier 1 and tier 2. So if you look at the bottom on the right-hand side under bus, you'll see the elementary drop is at 7:15. That tier 2 cannot drop until 8:15. And then we have 15 minutes in between each route after that. With this proposal, it is worth noting CYS currently does not have built-in PD time. And so this would also allow for us to be equitable and provide that professional development. So that is why we have put them in. With this schedule, and I'll go back to our proposal from the February 22nd board meeting. That proposal had the elementary starting at 8:05. We now have the students in this proposal starting at 7:45. We had test and RHS in the last proposal starting at 8:50. Test and RHS would be starting at 8:30 in this proposal. We had dentists starting at 9:05. In this proposal, they would start at 8:45. Hibbard was at 9:20. We've moved Hibbard up to start at 8:15, and then CYS had started at 7:50, and this is at 7:45. Worth noting is the loss of instructional minutes. And so when you look at the current time and you look at the proposal, and then you remove either the 45-minute Tuesday PD because we would no longer have that professional development time, or the 30 minutes at grades 5 through 12, the loss of instructional time per day would be 3 minutes at the elementary, 39 minutes at test, Dennis, and RHS, 41 minutes at Hibbard, and 30 minutes at CYS. That is,
Real quick, do we have that written somewhere?
no.
Okay, do you mind repeating that?
Sure.
Thank you.
Loss of instructional minutes per day, and just to kind of revisit how we calculated that, is you look at the start time and the end time from our current schedule, and then you look at the revised, but then you add back 45 minutes of PD at the elementary and 30 minutes in grades 5 through 12. So that loss per day is 3 minutes per day at the elementary, 39 minutes total during the day at test, Dennis, and RHS, 41 minutes at Hibbard, and 30 minutes at CYS.
Say it again for test Dennis and
Sure,
RHS.
39
Thank you.
total per day.
What was the last two?
41,
And that was 4.
that was for Hibbard, and 30 for CYS.
And RHS, how many periods in a day are there?
7.
And then Dennis and Tess, do they have periods?
Well, there's co-teaching at Test, so they have partners with their different subject areas, but at Dennis, they have 7 plus homeroom and bulldog time. So,
9 or, okay, 9 periods. I'm just trying to figure out how many minutes per period that affects.
But at Dennis, are all those equitable? I mean, like is Bulldog time the
Good.
same as like English class or?
bulldog time, I would have to double check that. I believe that's less time.
It's 10.
And
Yeah,
that
I think that's just the beginning. It's-
bulldog time is at the end of the day. The start of the day is their transition of like their homeroom.
So I would guess those would be shorter than.
They're already shorter now, yeah. And based on how this works, that then determines, for example, we've been looking at scheduling. Would they still run a 7-period day? Might they look at a 6-period day? Their master schedule's not perfect this year, so there's definitely tweaks that need to continue to be made. But that's where they're currently at.
Thank you.
Oops.
And since we're asking questions, so neither of the two proposed options that we're about to go over are the same as what was presented 2
Correct.
weeks ago. Right?
Correct. What
Okay.
we tried to do is to continue to hear the feedback that we were receiving and make revisions. so that we could continue to hopefully get closer to where we need to be prior to the next board meeting. So this was our attempt at hearing that feedback through the commentary, emails, specifically to Hibbard, I would say.
Thanks.
The second option, based on the survey results, is looking at an afternoon professional development time. So in this schedule, students would start at 7:45 at the elementary. They would start at 8:15 at test and RHS. Dennis would start at 8:30. Hibbard would start at 8:45. CYS would start at 7:45. But what you'll notice is that the end time with students is earlier. So think of this similarly to an early dismissal, but every day of the week. So that block of time, whether it be for an all-staff meeting, whether it be for teacher collaboration or cluster, whether it's supervision or teacher preference, it would all be at the end of the day. And that, one benefit of that is at the elementary level on the proposed option A, you still have to find supervision for those students as they're coming in, as they're being dropped as early as 7:15 on the buses. So in the afternoon, you wouldn't have the concern of students in the building because they would all be dismissed. There are other challenges though in terms of students who are staying after school for athletics and getting back, as well as coaches and other such to be able to participate. So kind of a give and take there.
I'm assuming that, like Boys and Girls Club would be amenable to the end time of, like the 1:45 and I'm assuming that we've connected with them.
So I think talking through this, getting additional feedback, that would be something that we need to reach out to those partners and see if we're, more serious about the afternoon
Gotcha.
option.
Okay.
But right now we wanted to revise a morning option, but also provide, based on the feedback of some of our parents stating that the afternoon did not have an impact on their daily schedule, how can we make the best out of both? And so really just looking to gain more feedback this evening and then connect with those partners. On this option B, schedule the loss per day. So if you want to jot these down, for elementary, it would be 41 minutes. For test, Dennis, and RHS, it would be 39 minutes. For Hibbard, it would be 41 minutes. And for CYS, it would be 30 minutes.
That's loss of what?
Per day, instructional minutes.
That's for PM.
That is for the PM route. But the students would not be in the building during that time. Sorry, PM PD.
Currently on Tuesdays, what time do the elementaries get out on Tuesday?
1:40.
1:40?
So our early dismissal again allows for 45 minutes for elementary professional development, 30 minutes for grades 5 through 12. So at this time, I would open up for conversation, questions, feedback, and feel free, anyone on our cabinet, director, leadership team, if I've missed something, feel free to add.
So option A for Hibbard on the busing schedule versus the start time. If the kid's bussed, he or she would lose an additional half an hour plus breakfast.
So in order to bus, we have to shuttle or do movement between buildings. So you have to have 15 minutes, which we currently shuttle to Hibbard now. So this is reflective of the
the times in which the,
Cause on the schedule, it says student start time 8:15, buses drop off 8:45.
oh, that is an incorrect, it should be a one, it should be that they drop.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, that's a typo. That's just simply a typo.
So could you repeat that?
Hibbard in the bus AM drop, there's a typo. So, yeah, because if the start time with students is 8:15, they're going to have to drop earlier than that. It would be at 8, and then they move to test at 8:15 and then Dennis at 8:30. The bus drop times are intended to be 15 minutes prior to the bell, so that students have time to get breakfast, get to their lockers, and get to class.
Okay, I was just,
If we're gonna, that's what on-time delivery means to us as a district, is that they have 15 minutes minimum to get from point A to classroom.
And so just for clarity's sake for our audience and for everyone else, Mrs. Scalford, you can just repeat that. Just
Absolutely.
as far as the,
So in the bottom box that's red, labeled bus,
this is
Hibbard has.
proposed option A.
Yep, in A, Hibbard has a typo, it should be 8 o'clock.
Instead of 8:45.
Yep.
It should say 8 o'clock. The
We
bus
apologize
PM
for that.
The bus PM pickup is still 2:45, but here, where it says bus and Hibbard, instead of 8:45, it should say 8 o'clock.
what, remind me what grades are at CYS?
K through 12.
Okay, so if IDOE guide is 6 hours for grades 7 through 12, and both options only provide 5.5 hours.
It's an alternative setting. Some of the students are only there for 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day.
Say
And
that
so
louder.
It's an alternative setting. Many of the students there aren't there for a full day. And that is a typical alternative setting bell schedule.
How long have we been on our current schedule for buses and start times?
Since Dennis and
Since-
Tess split.
At least, because I'm not sure that start times change, did the start times change then? So, yeah, at that point, when we moved from the 5-8 model to the 5-6, 7-8, yeah, 3 years.
And they didn't drastically change, did they?
I think it was mainly Dennis and Tess by 15 minutes. Prior to that, it was the same schedule
And what,
since 2005.
right, so there's a difference in routing structure when moving from the 5-8 to the 5-6, 7-8, because you have to sweep the entire city for both buildings now, where before you could sweep one side of the city for each building. So there had to be a complete change to the routing structure, so that, with the issues coming back out of COVID in staffing, that has lent itself to some additional challenges we did not expect at the time in which that change was made.
But we were told that by our busing company that there'd be no problem when they signed the contract.
Do you mean no problem,
I mean,
When?
I
like right now, or you mean no problem? Are you saying for next year?
I'm just saying, I mean,
So I will
why
say,
all of a sudden this doesn't work?
so there are some things that we're doing now. We've been able to hire some drivers with the change to the contract. So the goal is, this is about calendar, this is about professional development, and it's about solving challenges in the driving the buses piece. But we are working on changes currently that if no decisions were made to change for next year, what those routes would look like in order to ensure on-time delivery with the current structure. These are very separate conversations. So we are currently working, because we have been able to hire a significant number of drivers since Christmas break with the change to the contract, and we are continuing to see applicants that are coming through the system. We're waiting on 3 people to test, so we're just waiting on the state to say, here's your testing date, and then they'll get their final hours in, and then they'll be on the road. So we will make significant gains by the end of the year to the routing structure. But this proposal isn't strictly about buses. And so that's the part that, in order to have that conversation, we had to talk about what are the norms that we need in order to guarantee on-time delivery, and what would that look like from the busing structure situation. The piece about routing right now, the goal is if we made no changes next year, we would have on-time delivery moving forward. And they're making gains with the hiring, so we're trying to do that. This is a multifaceted proposal. It's not just about buses. And so that's where what you're seeing before you, if we did this, this is what that looks like. And so, because I do think we are working right now on some routing work that has to be done around the spring break time. So we're figuring that out and seeing what needs to be done, what can be done to improve with new additions. Hoping that each of these drivers get their testing dates prior to that. So we are working now anytime we can to make adjustments as we're going. This is about next school year. So that the contract piece, they are trying very hard to deliver what they have promised us. It does take time to get everybody tested, trained, and on the road. This is it has more to it than just that piece. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just keep hearing so much about busing that I kind of keep have this feeling that that's the whole thing driving this whole conversation.
It is not.
When I look at the proposed option, I guess A and B, I guess for RHS and Dennis, that's 5.5 or 6 minutes if you round it up per period. Would that be, when I did the math? I'm just trying to quantify. I mean, I don't want to lose any instructional minutes, but I'm trying to quantify. And then when the staff responded to how will your instruction be affected if our daily start and end times reduce, that question is kind of vague now because an elementary teacher made it, at that previous schedule, they were just being reduced by 6 minutes, and a high school by a bunch. I guess, was that broken down into what grade level they taught? And did
No.
we see? Okay.
And Dawn, could you just speak a little bit, one of my biggest concerns with this is the loss of educational time. That's just not sitting well with me, I guess. So could you what's the rationale behind that? Could you explain that?
Sure. I think it really comes down to quality over quantity and the number of minutes. There's a lot of research out there on teacher clarity, teacher collective efficacy, the things that have the greatest impact on instruction. And sometimes our beliefs, our personal beliefs of what we think impacts instruction may not be what the research shows. And so I agree, loss of instructional minutes is hard. Like that's, but at the same time, the things that we're gaining for our teachers to be able to collaborate on a daily basis, to be able to keep students safe before and after school with increased supervision, because we know if they don't walk into a safe place or a place where they feel safe, they're not going to be able to learn. And so the benefits of quality over quantity, in my mind, teacher collective efficacy, having that opportunity to collaborate and have time, because that's one thing we know teachers don't have enough of, is time to collaborate. Having that and being able to keep our kids safe, because we have heard from our community that arrival and dismissal, specifically at Test and Dennis, our secondary buildings, we lack in supervision there.
I've interviewed a lot of new teachers for a long time, and when you ask them what questions they have for you, probably 80% of them will say, "What do you have to help new teachers?" A third of our teachers are new teachers, less than 2 years, and having them be able to rub shoulders with a veteran teacher and get some training and get some help and to get some feedback on a daily basis, or 3 times a day or 4 times a day, whatever it is, I think is valuable. And I think that in my opinion, can compensate for a loss of 30 minutes or a loss of 5 minutes at the secondary level. It bothers me too to have that less time, but if it's bad instruction, it's worse than no instruction.
Yep.
So I think to maintain and to retain teachers, which Ms. Bolser probably battles and keeps her up at night every night, is probably this could be a step towards that. And if it keeps us to have 10 extra teachers and not have to hire 10 new teachers, I think that's valuable.
I do like the idea of it possibly helping change the culture of a lot of our, buildings that have struggled with teacher retention, and feeling like, okay, if I had a team that I'm working with, I would want to come to work and I would do a better job and I hear what you're saying.
And he is correct. If once we have some even entrance interviews after a brief check back with them, the procedures that we have in place to help facilitate our new teachers and trainings is right now much of that's thrown at them all at once, and that's very difficult for them to retain all of that information. We do have mentors in place and other things that are scattered out, but it's such a huge learning curve, especially for those on an emergency licensure. And like Mr. Mop said, that is a high question that we receive. That's feedback that we have received also when we are talking about an employee retention survey. That is certainly, if you start to segregate that data down based off of, the teaching year and things of such, that is certainly feedback that we have received, especially knowing a third of our teachers are probationary or new teacher status.
So then, this whole loss of education time though, how does that translate to, the working parent, then who is, needing to have supervision for their kid? I mean, obviously I was asking about Boys and Girls Club with the, end time, if we did the earlier option, but, what would that look like?
I'm sorry for interrupting. How close is option B to Tuesday? To a current Tuesday? I mean, because parents have had a long time to figure that thing out. And I know it's one day a week, and it's easy to get grandma to pick her up, a little bit early 1 day a week. But how close is that to a regular Tuesday schedule right now?
Do you want me to jump in? So elementary currently dismisses at 1:40. Then your secondary schools dismiss, I believe it is at 2:50.
2:50?
Yep. And then Hibbard dismisses a little before, about 15 minutes before that, because they shuttle back to.
So it's pretty close to it.
It's very close to what this would look like from the end of the day.
So what challenges would that present with after-school activities, I guess?
And that's my,
Yeah.
coaches.
You stay after
We
for
really
spell
want-
ball, math ball, basketball.
And we want our staff to be involved in coaching and those after-school
That would
activities.
eliminate the
And that-
teachers, right?
Well, I mean, you'd have to figure that out, and I don't know how you do go about doing that.
Must-
I mean, at one point, do you have coaches that are in season miss the
Right.
So,
PDE?
I
You
guess
may,
we
you
can
may get
talk
more people
about
to coach.
what happens.
You would.
And Mr. Bolser, I believe, is here and can jump in if I have this wrong, but currently what is happening on Tuesdays is practices will begin at the normal time that they start the rest of the week. So, if a practice begins at 4 to 5:30, then they start at 4 to 5:30.
Do you have lay coaches kind of help out with that then?
Well, lay
Assistants,
coaches
or-
work other jobs.
Right.
And so that's one thing that we hear from lay coaches sometimes is that we at school forget that they don't work like school hours. And so they will usually have practices from 5:30 to 7:30 or 6 to 8 or 7 to 8:30. So the practice schedule is different just depending on who the coach is, on the schedule at the building, and how many sports they're trying to work together
Does that
with.
affect participation?
It has not yet. I will say that sometimes it does cause supervision
Can he
questions?
answer that? I mean, can we ask Mr. Bolster?
Absolutely.
Okay, repeat that question again?
Sorry to wake you up back there, but, so does having, an hour and a half from the end of the school day to the beginning of practice, does that affect participation?
It does definitely with middle school students.
Yeah.
If kids have to go home, the likelihood of them returning back for practices is, the percentages are actually probably more like half. I know in the girls' basketball program, when practices were scheduled for middle school girls at the 6 o'clock slot, normally about 50% of the student athletes came back for practice. The same thing was in effect last year with track and field, because their practices were later due to, there were concerns about the facility, and the participation numbers were drastically low. Obviously at the high school, it becomes a little bit different. A lot of those kids will hang out down in the Tiernan Center area on Tuesdays. That does become a supervision issue.
Yeah, Mr. Bolster there to take care of it.
How are we currently handling that with supervision?
Well, there are lay coaches or assistant coaches that are not in professional development. Sometimes practices will start early with the lay coach just getting warmed up, or we will have people that will, like football, for instance, with lay coaches will do weightlifting or certain things like that on their Tuesday afternoons. But I don't know that that's ideal for 5 days a week, to not have the head coach. If we're trying to get teachers to be the head involved in coaching and then they're missing 45 minutes of practice, that's not necessarily the ideal instruction time.
Do you have many teams practice before school?
Very few. And that, again, is a lot of transportation. Swim does it, and their participation numbers are great. So,
And they've done it
but
for
that's
80 years.
a culture thing. They do it forever.
I did confirm end times for early dismissal. So at the elementary, it's 1:40.
Thank you. Sorry.
At Test, it is 2:34. At Dennis, it's 2:49. At RHS, it's 2:49, and at Hibbert, it's 2:34, and at CYS, it's 2 o'clock. So the biggest difference there is at Hibbert on the option B. Other than that, it's really like 5 to 10 minutes difference than the current early dismissal. The elementary minutes, instructional minutes, are impacted greater on option B than option A. Option A, it's 3 minutes per day of decreased instructional time. On option B, it's 41 minutes.
How does that affect preschools that are going half day?
What we would do is that would be like the next level of looking at the preschool schedule, because we have different components there. We have half day, full day, we have on my way pre-K. Typically, the special ed preschool, if you're asking about that, would follow this schedule. The others would be modified.
One of the things I think I would add too is, I think everyone would agree that student behavior is also a concern when we talk about quantity to quality. And, you trying to avoid something that would have an indirect result to that, I think would be concerning if you're looking at something that could prohibit them from being in extracurriculars, because data does show that the more that students are involved and provided ways to be involved, that does help. And so if there's ways to facilitate that rather than to create an additional barrier, that would be the one thing I would also add as a concern, knowing that that's what the data is showing.
Has this been shared with REA?
This option A and B has not. This is what we've been working on since the surveys I shouldn't say it has not been shared with REA. It's the surveys went out and the feedback was used to develop this.
Has been shared with our partners at all? Probably not,
yet.
because you're still,
This is really just to gather
Overall,
information, and if we can have some direction, then we'll go back and
okay.
And the survey just closed today, right?
it's actually still open, but yes.
On the instructional time, I mean, I think it does sound uninviting, bad maybe. And I've been an advocate for education efficiency, create interest, give the why, have kids know why they're wanting to learn. But when I look back to my kids, they're both K-12, I guess almost 100 classes between them, all told. I think there was one teacher that utilized every moment. She happens to be here. So Mrs. Jordan, thank you. But as a parent, I never once said, boy, my kids just were in school an extra hour. What I said as a parent often was, boy, I wish that class was better. I wish this teacher, just doesn't know what they're doing. And happened way too often. I know there were holes, and many of those teachers have moved on. But, if we had the tools to help a teacher that comes in the district that is struggling, aren't we way better off to elevate the quality of our entire staff rather than just lengthen the day or keep the day? I mean, to me, that's a trade-off that I think is worth trying, because our system needs work. We have to think differently about how we can best educate our students, and for a kid that to give a teacher more tools. I mean, we talk about individualized education and all these other things. When you want as big a toolbox as you can have, and the only way I see to do that is through continuing ed. I mean, we have to help provide the tools so the teachers can make those now more limited sacred moments with the kids better. And it's not easy. I mean, I'm not a teacher because it's not an easy task, but I think while the reduced time is, I mean, it's hard to get your head around that. But to think of, if we can answer the why and have that education efficiency where kids come in, they want to learn. If a kid wants to learn, I mean, it's going to be such a much easier task. And so let's help give our teachers the tools to help get those kids in the right mindset where they can then learn and benefit. Well, that's my little soapbox. Sorry.
What are state averages on normal instruction days? It fall closer to IDOE?
I don't know of a state
Guidelines?
average. I just know what the guidelines are with the Department of Ed.
That's
Now,
a hard
we did,
number
we started to reach out to schools in our community of practice to figure out the instructional minutes, and it really varies. It's based on need. And I think that's kind of the beauty of the minimum is the state gives you the minimum of 5 hours and 6 hours, but you develop a schedule based on what your teachers need in order to do the job. So there isn't a state average. There is just the IDOE guidance of how many minutes you have to have per day.
Dawn, is the 180, is that for the days, is that an at least 180 days also? Because the data on that does show the majority or most are at 180 where they could actually go
a balanced calendar.
Yeah, a balanced or above
That's
that
correct.
as
It's a good
well.
point.
Even so.
Yes. And we did in some of the open responses from the families, I would say the trends that I saw in reading, again, these were the open-ended questions or open-ended feedback. Is there any other information you would like for us to consider? I did hear secondary, better to learn, later start time. I heard a lot about individualizing student support for students in special education, 504 plans, accommodations. I heard a lot about safety and discipline and supporting our teachers with those things. Early drop-offs, opportunities that if school is gonna start at 8, can they drop off earlier than 8? So there were open-ended responses.
So what's our answer to that? I mean,
Well, we would with morning supervision. With this schedule, you would have teachers that you could have supervise in certain areas throughout the week. Now, we wouldn't want that to be babysitting of 45 minutes, right? So you have to have a start time, but with buses, we do 15 minutes drop before. So I would say we would probably match that time. A lot of parents talked about the drop from one building to the next and making sure that that flowed. I heard a lot about that in the responses. Discipline, safety, security. Do not take winter break away from kids. Keeping breaks at the same number of days.
I think that's partly too, you start to see a rise. I mean, there's a correlation to that student behavior. As you look at the trends to that, there's a trend that it's upward nearing a break. So I think everybody's ready for that reset.
Concerns possibly about attendance. Will this make its student attendance worse or better? School safety, classroom management. Early release days make it very challenging for parents to work. So it really is, and I think that's the hardest part is it is imperfect. Nothing is perfect, and you try to take in as much consensus, come to consensus by taking in as much feedback from different stakeholders, but ultimately knowing what our district needs right now with 33% being probationary teachers, how can we support those teachers and build the system and structures that will retain them. So, and that's just very difficult to do in our secondary buildings. And if you ask Mrs. Thomas at Test, or if you ask Mrs. Cooper at Dennis, or even Miss Wolpe at the high school, they will say 30 minutes once a week is not enough. And it's very hard to differentiate for different contents. So when you know content knowledge is a concern at a specific building, you've got to be able to provide time to work specifically with your science teachers, specifically with your language arts teachers, and so forth. So this schedule would allow for that.
Were there any open-ended responses from the teacher surveys that talked about the loss of instructional time, or was there an open-ended part, I guess?
I don't believe there was an open, on any of the questions they could do other,
Okay.
but I don't believe there was an open-ended question at the end. Mrs. Hazelbaker, could you confirm that?
Excuse me, I'll look.
Okay, thank you.
all right, any more discussion before we open it up to public commentary and hear questions, concerns, comments from, and then we will have more board discussion after that. So,
I think there's a couple from the elementary side. If they speak, I'd kind of hear their input on the earlier time. That's moving them almost an hour before report time, before all the other teachers.
Moving from 7:15 to 7 a.m.
Yeah, and that report time seems really early, but
Well, option A, you mean option A.
Change
Yeah.
currently.
In order to fix not having a building start after 9 o'clock and knowing the tiers and the hour in between and the 15 minutes, then that's what bumped that time to 7. Does that make sense?
mm-hmm.
Because before it was 9:20, we were trying to keep the 7:15 arrival for elementary teachers the same, and that's what pushed with the tiers, Hibbert, or one building, whatever building that would be after, to 9:20.
all right,
But yes, that is.
anything else?
Do we want to talk any more about the calendar itself before we open up to public commentary?
Sure, yeah, let's go ahead and then we can double back after public commentary. Thank you. Yeah, any questions and comments over the calendar?
Ms. Sonsini,
My comment.
there was a list of, some additional, there was an open-ended question at the end of the parent survey, community survey. So there is a list of.
The teacher.
Oh, the teacher, I'm so sorry.
I'm just gonna say again, I said at last meeting, and Mrs. Bolser actually alluded to it with, student behavior, how discipline ramps up toward the end of the nearing breaks. From the start of school to fall break, we have 11 weeks. From fall fall break to Christmas break with Thanksgiving in there, 7 weeks. From the beginning of the second semester to spring break's 11 weeks, and from we get back from spring break to the end of the school year is 8 weeks. So that's not real balanced. It seems like fall break's a little late. That's my input on that. And spring break, I mean, it's closer, but I can see that being moved up a week too, but that's.
And the only reason we stuck with fall break the way it is now is because of the other schools in the county to match their calendar, because we did not typically put our calendar out in advance. And so to match those, that's where their fall break.
They participate with our courier program.
But yes, that could be moved.
We have multiple.
It would definitely be a domino effect to our community partners though, because of the lateness. They've already approved their calendars and kept the same fall break.
So it would be something though, for the following year, we could
Get ahead of.
set the pace, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then-
that's
Because the rest of the county is.
That needs to be
indeed waiting.
Okay.
Start working on next year's next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll
Maybe
start
we'll have
next
it
week.
done by the end of next year.
No, I mean,
Thank you, Stacy.
we should be 2 years. We should be 2 years out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
One thing that, and this is just personal for me, I really don't like using the 15th of January and the 19th of February as possible snow days, and that's just, those days are pretty important to a lot of people. But I get it too, and so it's a trade-off, but personally, I don't think that it won't stop me from.
All right, other calendar.
I was in the building a little bit this week, and I think there was at least one, if not two phone calls of parents asking for
Just
when's
something.
fall break, when is
Just
the.
something.
Yeah, give me the breaks,
So I can
and I
plan.
think when I spoke to Bridget, she said every day there's tons of calls wanting, so getting the calendar set, I think is critical. The time, both of these are critical, but the calendar is even more important to get set for parents and families to be able to plan on sooner than later.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying that. And
I mean, I know we normally don't take votes in the work session, but it still is a public meeting where votes can be taken.
Yes.
And I
Is that
guess
a motion?
I think we need
I'll
to-
wait for the comments. I just.
so. While we're on the comment, let's bring back the inclement weather days and the survey responses. So if I could restate those for you, according to our staff, 42% would prefer asynchronous instruction. 28% roughly would like synchronous instruction, and 21% would like to make up those days in person. So asynchronous preferred, the 3 days that would be allowed, followed by synchronous, and then makeup days based on percentages. Now let's flip to the families, and 43% would prefer asynchronous be used first, followed by 33% that would prefer that they be made up in person, and then 19% synchronous instruction.
Yeah.
But still high
19
school.
high school families.
And it's impossible to have asynchronous in the elementary and synchronous in the middle.
So we've done, I mean, it creates
It creates.
what we've done this year,
And then
and
the calendar
right, but you
issues.
could do that. So for example, with the high school, you know, I guess the silver lining is because of the water leak, they were able to use synchronous instruction, and then when they've continued to use those synchronous days. So if they have an inclement weather day, they can just have synchronous instruction because they're prepared and ready to do so.
And there's
One of-
cross-training with the middle and
One of the things-
intermediate schools with the synchronous, I believe, is occurring now, so.
They are. One of the things that is difficult to do that is the teachers who cover multiple buildings at multiple levels. So if you have a high school teacher that is also helping at the middle school level, which is occurring. That makes it very difficult for them.
For music or, I'm
Music,
just thinking, is
It
there,
only allows 3 email days too, right?
Asynchronous. Correct.
But we do have quite a few that are multi-building.
What I'm saying is the elementary can only do 3 of those.
Asynchronous, you can only do 3.
Per
Anyone,
state.
Per state.
Right. So that was his question, was,
if you use
Well-
asynchronous in the elementary, then you're using those days.
You could only use 3 of them, and then you would have to make up those days at the end of the year. So this year, our elementaries will go, well, K through 8, will go 1 day longer in person than our high school. Because our high school
Right.
utilized a synchronous instructional day, and the elementary, well, in K through 8, then has to make up that day in person.
President Stoltz and trustees, I apologize. I know that we've had conversations just so that everyone is aware. I think hopefully you all are in agreement that we would extend to 7:15. I know we got off to a later start, but to make sure that our patrons get an opportunity to contribute for at least a third of our conversation.
Yep.
Are we okay?
I think we're ready. Kim,
How many do we have, Mrs. Claypool?
We have 3 right now. Does someone else want to sign
Okay.
up?
last chance.
And so before Mrs. Felsman, actually as Mrs. Felsman is making her way to the chair, she signed it up.
signing up.
Okay, before folks make it to the seat of honor, as we say, I think Mrs.
Yep, I'll read the regulations, so to speak. Okay, so the Board of School Trustees recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and the importance of allowing members of the public to express themselves on corporation matters. The board wants to ensure that the public feels welcome and the concerns are answered in a timely and efficient manner. The maximum time for individual speakers is 5 minutes per person. The board expects personal decorum and factual information from the speaker. The president reserves the right to interrupt the speaker when the statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, and obscene, or if it interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting. Comments recognizing the work of staff and students are always welcome. However, critical remarks concerning specific school personnel or students are to be made through the complaint process available in policy 8130. School board members do not respond to public comments during the meeting. The public participant will receive a personal follow-up email from the board president within a week. So, Kim, who do we have?
First up is Dwayne Hodge.
Thank you, President Stoltz, board members. Pardon me, I had a tooth extraction today, so if it sounds, I'm not too articulate or something dropping on my mouth, that's the reason. First of all, I do want to commend the board in the way that you've addressed the issue today with reasonable time for board discussion and then allowing time for public input. My experience in 42 years of education and 32 of them with boards, I said I'd never go to another board meeting. But it is important, I think, to stay, to remain involved. But that's something that's really appreciated, that you recognize that time and the public doesn't have to wait 2 hours for the board discusses an issue. So I commend you on that. The other thing is, what I just want to share is basically some questions I think the board needs to address. I'm not expecting any answers or anything tonight, and I'm sure you will think about these. But obviously the instructional time issue, you're addressing that. You have plans in place and options. I think the biggest thing you need to think about, because as I look at this, it's not entirely a busing issue. You know, it sounds like it's a safety, supervision, staff development issue. I think that's what you're trying to put together. But I just ask that you consider maybe the what, the who, and the how as you go through this. And that is simply, you know, what is the plan, or what's going to be the plan and the tools that you're going to use to bring about what you're looking at is academic achievement and classroom management improvement. That sounds to me like the main issue you're working at. And the who is, who's going to do it? And the final question is, how will you know, or how will you measure if it's really making a difference when you go to new this plan? because you're trading off a considerable amount of instructional time. You can talk 39 minutes a day at the secondary level, you're talking about 195 minutes per week. That's 3 hours of instruction per week. And so you just need to look at the big pictures, what I'm saying. I think all the things you addressed are true, but when you look at a loss of 3 hours of instruction per week, I don't know that the quality-quantity issue makes sense. You know, that can be smoke and mirrors either way. So anyway, those are my comments, and I think you just think about the what, the who, and the how if you pursue this new approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hodges.
Thank you. And we are coming up with a new script, by the way, because this is meant to be a dialogue. So yeah, it is something where if anyone has questions for Dwayne or comments, other than thank you, appreciate that, then that's
Kelly McDermott.
fair game.
Good evening.
And Kelly, you're welcome to sit or stand, whichever you're more comfortable with. So.
I think I've been sitting a while now.
Right,
so
true.
I want to come before the board this evening to express there are still a lot of concerns about the hours proposal. On the January 6th PD, when I spoke with, I believe that was when I spoke with faculty members that were left behind at Civic Hall, one of the things I said was I quoted an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This process has not been a go-together process. There was a discussion meeting held on February 4th. By discussion, I mean corporate discussion. There was 1 hour's proposal that was brought to the discussion table there. And there was a different one that was brought to the board meeting, at the most recent board meeting. And at that point, Mr. Lee addressed, those concerns in my absence, which I appreciate very much. And I think partly in response to those concerns, Mr. Zaleski had spoken about the need to bring all the stakeholders together in the process moving forward as the survey was developed and as we move forward from there. Sadly, REA was left out of the survey development process even. Quite frankly, I was literally sitting in the building when it was being worked on. And that was known. And yet we were still left out of the process. If I had been included at that point, obviously I would have said that I don't represent everybody and every view, and that it is also part of Mr. Zaleski's charge was to bring parents involved as well, and I couldn't, I don't speak for them, so that I felt I would have recommended that it become a more inclusive meeting, but that opportunity was passed over. Tonight I'm looking at 2 proposed options, neither of which has come to corporate discussion. Last week's corporate discussion was canceled. Seems to me this would have been a great topic of discussion. I have a lot of concerns about the fact that the association is being left out of the conversation, and part of that is reflected in what we heard tonight with there are missing pieces. I can tell you that one of those missing pieces that was discussed was this idea of well, first of all, let me back up. There was conversation about that at one point there was discussion at TEST with the association about hours. That's news to me because I see the building minutes. So I went to my building reps just a few minutes ago and said, have you ever discussed hours in building discussion at TEST? The answer is no. They didn't have a discussion in February. The March minutes don't reflect it. The reps told me no, they did not discuss it. That leaves me with a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. The other part of this is when it was referenced that there were things that were, that there wasn't a breakdown by level. REA conducted a survey recently that included hours. We broke it down by building. We can give you that information. If we would have been included in the conversation in the development of this survey, that would have been a suggestion. that we were not included. In addition to that, parents were asked if they, with this built-in time, what would be your preferred professional development for teachers?
Kelly, you have 1 minute.
Parents were asked that question, but teachers were not. There are just a lot of issues, a lot of questions, and a lot of concerns still remaining. So I will bring it back. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
And Kelly, do you mind staying up for,
Absolutely.
Thank you, just for our conversation. And just so the entire board knows, as well as central office, one of the things that we spoke about today when we met, basically goes right back to that African proverb. We talked about the idea of possibly getting the band back together, so to speak, the committee back together, and seeing what thoughts and ideas, what are we missing? Because we have 2 new proposed calendar schedules. And so getting everybody's input that was on that original calendar and schedule committee so that we're able to see what's falling through the cracks, basically.
Right,
So that was something that the REA felt like would be appreciated.
Absolutely.
That's something that the exec committee felt we would appreciate. So I guess I want to know what the rest of the board thinks. Yeah, fast and far. I'd rather go far.
I appreciate that.
We've gotta,
I would too. Because we do want to be collaborative. I want to be very clear about that. We definitely want to be collaborative. And teachers aren't necessarily monolithic either. We get a variety of opinions from teachers as well, which is why we built in, I shouldn't say we, I should give due credit where it is due. Mark Price and Trey Ronnie built in the breakdown by building so we could see, what's going on in different buildings, what issues are important at levels, but also at buildings, because that tells us a lot.
So, what are we thinking? Are we good with getting that? Aaron, you look like you're about to say something.
I'll let you finish.
Okay. No, are we good with getting the band back together, so to speak, reconvening the committee and
just for clarity, just to add,
Yeah.
as Mrs. Stoles had mentioned, and as we had previously discussed a few hours back, what that would entail is at our last school board meeting, it was tabled that by the March 22nd school board meeting, indeed, our central office team would be bringing back a recommendation. And so with this particular proposal, if indeed we're still trying to meet that March 22nd date of coming back with a recommendation, reassembling the committee as well as bringing others to the table that are necessarily involved would need to occur within the next 2 weeks. However, of what we know and of what we have experienced, it may be a little longer. So if indeed we're comfortable with the fact that such a process may extend us beyond March 22nd board meeting.
which goes back to far or fast.
Far or fast,
It's like,
then,
which one are we
yeah,
wanting?
just to- Yeah, absolutely.
And
I think administration can do whatever you guys need to do to get a resolution. If it's reconvening a committee, that's fine. If it's making a recommendation, that's fine. At some point, someone needs to make a choice, and I think we're ready for the choice to be made. So I would throw that back in your court. If you think that's the best way to go forward, go for it. Because the end result is we need a calendar that we can approve, that everyone has as much buy-in as possible. It's not no one's gonna be 100% satisfied with the calendar. So what you're
we all
doing
agree on that.
is trying to have the best overall choice for our kids.
And another option may be that we could, I would love to talk about this as well, perhaps pass a calendar and hold off and get the collaboration going again on the Bell schedule.
And that was my question. Kelly, have you seen the current calendar?
I have.
And REA's seen it, and they're
Yes, and it has been to discussion. Now, we did share concerns. We had a prior meeting. We did share concerns that when it came to discussion in December, we asked a multitude of questions that went unanswered, and then it came here. I recognize what Mr. Weber's saying, that, there's a point at which, we need to move forward. I totally agree with that, and I know there are outside influences. I think that, I do agree that the two can be separated, with the caveat that we talk about the Tuesday PD, if we're going back to what is, obviously that creates a challenge. I do think that, there may be still some room for conversation on that calendar that wouldn't take a lot of effort. I don't think anybody wants to go back in there and recreate the whole thing. I think there's, the framework is there. I just think that, as I said, from my perspective, it should have come back after the December meeting for the follow-up conversation and the answers to the questions prior to coming to this level.
Kelly, real quick. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that a teacher brought to my attention, again, that the grading periods weren't evenly distributed in semester 1, so you have not seen that until this evening.
Okay. Oh, so this is a different one?
Yes, because the grading periods weren't evenly distributed, so the first grading period, a teacher brought to my attention that there were 32 days. The second grading period had 29, and the third had 27. And so I reworked that in this proposal because I wanted to evenly distribute, as I know people prefer. So that is a minor change, but still worth noting that, so they haven't. And then the second thing that I just wanted to clarify is when I was referring to test and the building level discussion, that was prior to the start of this school year. That was in the spring as we were looking at cluster time and when would be best to do that. So they had that discussion. Initially, they were thinking about asking teachers to come in before the students would come in, but they said they would prefer to do it during the prep, so they traded that off. So it was for to be implemented in this school year, but it is in the notes from last spring with that building level. That was their preference.
Mr. Weber,
We're bringing conversations from last year's building discussion into this year.
I just mentioned that because when I talked about the current professional development, that was decided upon at that building for this school year.
Not even the same discussion team.
For clarity, just so that I understand it myself, what I think are you referencing that with regard to this year's calendar we're currently embedded in?
Mm-hmm.
With regard to professional development time and the current calendar test. Of course, those decisions would have been made last year. What I'm saying is that those conversations did indeed occur at the building level. And what I think, and again, Mrs. McDermott will correct me if I'm wrong, what I hear Mrs. McDermott saying is that indeed that was compared to this year, totally different.
Right.
Team, totally different.
And for the record, one of the things that I do each year is deliver to the corporation a letter of no acquiescence, which says we are asserting our discussion rights for this year, even if in the past they have not been asserted, which basically deals with that.
And that's what I wanted, because I wanted to come back just to clarify for myself and make sure I understand and comprehend.
And we may want to check with Mrs. Thomas too. I just know they were discussed at the building level for that time. So, I said last year for this year, but we need to look at the minutes to see when exactly, what month it happened in.
Well, what I want to clarify is that with the schedule that we're currently on, the 22-23 calendar that we're currently on.
Right.
What you were referencing is, as far as when you referenced the discussion at the level there at test.
Correct.
For this year's calendar, which decisions about this year's calendar would have been made last year. What I hear you saying is that those conversations did occur.
They did occur. We just need to confirm the date and time to follow up with Mrs. McDermott. I'm happy to do
because
that.
And Dr. Wright's using the term calendar, we're talking hours, correct?
Yeah, we
Because that's where the discussion was earlier. It was with the hours proposal.
Instead
not
of
the calendar
30
proposal.
minutes on Tuesday, they meet in their departments during their prep one day in place of that 30 minutes
This year. But those decisions would have been made last year. And what I hear you saying is that
we need to confirm when
conversations.
specifically those happened, but it was building discussion that came to that agreement.
Okay. Going back to just the calendar and possibly moving on that. So just speaking off the cuff for REA, sorry to put you on the spot. Do you feel like the next board meeting, March 22nd, I believe, is that a reasonable, like, would
What?
that give,
And I apologize, that's what I was gonna ask, if you don't mind, I apologize, President Scholes.
you can read my mind.
But not necessarily, but that was the question I was gonna pose to Mr. Weber and to you all as trustees, is
Okay.
whether or not you all were expecting us to come back on the 22nd as a central office with a recommendation, or are you comfortable if we indeed do press forward with a thorough process that would allow us to go longer?
Well, I guess I'm,
I'm sorry.
just as an individual, and I'd like,
Would you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah.
I would like to know if the REA would feel comfortable with a March 22nd calendar being presented. Does that give you enough time to weigh in? And
Well, obviously, it's a difficult question to answer because everybody's schedules,
Right.
are so packed. So assuming everybody can make the time, and I would hope, we all obviously would want to prioritize that. Now, I will say, one of the conversations that was had here last week or 2 weeks ago was to include calendar committee folks, who were a part of the early conversations. I don't know if that's the direction or if you're talking just a representative group from REA, so that also would factor in as to who are we including. It was also discussed at that point, to bring parents in. So
The
I
original
suppose that
calendar
depends
committee,
on.
can you remind us who was on that original calendar
Sure,
committee?
and I did invite them this evening
But-
to,
In the
Does it have
meantime,
parents
if we
and-
approve the dates, I think we can slide on the March 22nd. I mean, take as much time as you need to get the answers we need, but if we can do the dates later tonight, we can plug onto, administration can work on the hourly schedule for, if it's 2 weeks, is it 4 weeks, is it 6 weeks? I mean, we want it as soon as possible, but we don't want to be back here.
I with all due respect, I would suggest that needs to go to corporate discussion. It's not been there.
we do have that.
It's
meeting
been
on
there
the-
except for the grading periods.
the corporate discussions on the 15th.
So you've seen all the.
Yes, the
I
corporate
believe so.
discussions on the
Okay.
15th, and we knew that this date was single out for just the discussion on the
Right.
calendar, and it has evolved, and in order to just try to facilitate as much communication surrounding this, we knew that this was here and we knew the 15th was there. So we're just trying to be respectful of everybody's time, because that is something that we hear a lot of feedback too, is how much everybody's overwhelmed. So you can't meet all the balances to all the pressing concerns that we have, but that was out of respect for everybody, was just trying to best facilitate this discussion, knowing that today existed, knowing that the 15th existed, knowing that the 22nd existed. That was the thought.
So does it
Was
seem
that a
like,
reference to the cancellation of?
Yeah.
If you recall, our conversation was I needed to clear that with my folks, but we preferred to continue meeting twice a month.
Well, we had it on there that if there were any agenda items, that to also provide agenda items. There were no agenda items provided by either side. The 15th is there, which is before the board action date. It was not my understanding that the board would be taking any action this evening, because that's how these were originally designed, I thought. And then the 22nd was there. So we were receiving so much input and feedback. We're sent back to the drawing board. We're using tonight to receive all of the input from all the stakeholders. If we have to go back to the drawing board and then take it back the 15th. So that was the thought.
And to answer your question, Mrs. Brenton, the elementary representatives appointed by the association were Alexis Crossett, Kristen Jones, and Patsy Baker. I believe Patsy's here this evening. At the middle intermediate, those appointed were Jeannie Hendricks, Roya Mays, and Jennifer Sams. At the high school level, AJ Cox, Matt Fisher, and Mark Price. We had principals represented at each level, Melissa Jordan here this evening, Crystal Cooper, and Ray Wolpe. And then parents, 2 of which are in attendance this evening, Jason Blank and Lisa Felsman, as well as Amanda Light and Clay Bolser, our athletic director.
I feel like if we're gonna, bring back a committee, it needs to be that committee and those people who started the process to look again at
If we do that, though, I do want to be respectful of the discussion team to have something before the 15th so that they can have input on what is going to be presented potentially to the board, to just say, this is, because I think that that's the confusion, is there has been adjustments trying to take in that discussion and actually apply it. So to be respectful to the discussion team in that process, that is on the 15th. And what the hope was, is to show this as kind of like a finalized draft and say, okay, now you guys can see the finalized. Now is there anything else before then it needs to go to the board for the completion? Because I think that that's truly the concept of respecting, not just giving 80 different drafts. And you know, that does become difficult to answer because we need to narrow it down.
And I would also add to that, it does become difficult, and out of respect of those that are serving on the committee and giving feedback, and then taking that to corporate discussion, hearing that feedback, making those changes. So like continuing to go back and forth, and again, not everyone agrees on every component of it. It is difficult. It's a complex topic, so.
There's 4 more speakers, so before we, just to watch your time.
Proposed timeline then.
I think it's important after hearing to make sure that there is a finalized draft of recommendation to send to the 15th. And then, so if there is if we are going to try to reconvene the calendar committee, I mean, today's the 8th, I would respectfully ask on behalf of the relationship to do that before the 15th so that we can have true, discussion on that final version from the discussion committee.
Okay. Kelly, anything else
No.
to add? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Kim.
Jason Blum.
All right.
Good evening. I'm a parent with 3 students at Crestdale and have a couple different thoughts. First, I want to echo the things of one of the other commenters to let us hear some of your discussion in the background before we're asked to comment. It is many times intimidating and challenging to provide an opinion when we don't have the same facts that this group may have. So thank you for considering a different perspective, and also thank you for seeking more input. It sounds like we have a process still to go and still to learn, and there are multiple stakeholders, as you all know and represent in our community. So thank you for continuing to look for ways to engage our teachers, who we need to be successful, for our students to be successful, and also to hear the different perspectives of parents, and that there are different parental backgrounds in our community. I think that's one of the things we would all say is unique about our community at times, is some of that cross-section that we meld together. So thank you for looking for ways to engage us. And also thank you for sharing those results, because I think that helps us hear others' perspectives and understand those other perspectives. I would encourage the board to not formally act on the calendar tonight, because the board has said that they would not. And as we look to build that trust in the community discussion, I think holding to those timelines is important. At the same time, I would encourage the board to consider a gentleman's agreement that fall break, spring break, and Christmas break are set. Because I think as a parent, that's all I care about. I need to book hotels, I need to book airfare if I'm gonna do something. So, but I would encourage that the official stuff doesn't finalize until the timeline that was previously announced. I would ask a question as we talk the calendar. My understanding is one of the things that has guided the late start days is instructional minutes that we are obligated to have, and so that we can still count that as an instructional day when we have snow and ice. So my question back is, does reducing some of that extra instructional minutes all of a sudden mean that we can no longer have 2-hour late starts when we have fog and ice, and all of a sudden we get more snow days? I think the instructional value of makeup days after testing is very limited to the district. If what we're measured against by the state and by our peers is what those test scores are, I'm not sure how instructional minutes in May and June are helping us with the tests that are administered in March and April. So would ask that you all consider that as we consider. I agree, January, February are nice 3-day weekends, but is that a minute, are those minutes that actually add value and can improve test scores, which I think is how we're all being asked to evaluate. So thank you for your time and thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Nice.
Lisa Phil.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to echo what Sayward Salazar said a couple weeks ago when she said that when we cut instructional time, often it's those little ones who need that the most, who suffer the most by not having that. Because as you all know, we have many children who live in trauma and in deep poverty and who welcome their time at school. They can't wait for school to start again after Christmas. And I'm concerned about those little ones who will have almost 3 weeks less of that face time with their teachers who they love and who they will benefit from learning from, especially for our little ones who lost so much time during the pandemic where they were not getting that reading instruction that they needed to be ready to be great readers once they hit 3rd grade, and we're not just learning to read but reading to learn. So
Lisa, can I ask you a quick question? So, would you separate between the older kids and the younger kids?
I think so.
Okay, because some of our options don't change elementary 3 minutes, so I just wanted to know if that was reasonable to you.
Yes, I think so. I just
Thank
am
you.
concerned though about the little ones.
Yes.
And
Me
with
too.
lunch too, with food, I maybe that doesn't make. So that is one of my current concerns. Another one is about, Mr. Hodgen brought up, how will you know if adding all of this in this time for teachers to have this time together, how will you know if that's actually working? What kind of measurements will you be using to see that? The other thing I heard Mrs. Bolser say was discipline and social emotional learning are intensively becoming an issue, and I wondered if there is any plan to add any kind of a social emotional training, education. I know we have talked about trust-based relational intervention, TBRI, and I'm really hoping that's something that our teachers will be able to get, because it sounds like it's very user-friendly and stuff that you can really use to help regulate yourself so that then your students can be regulated by being in your classroom. So I'm hoping that if we indeed do make all of these changes, and I think my other statement is, do we have to make changes? Could we tweak what we already have? Do we have to make this massive, huge change? I don't know. But if we indeed do, I would love to see teachers getting intensive encouragement, teaching, instruction around social emotional learning as well, and making it be stuff they can actually use and they'll like, and not just tune out while there's a video playing. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead. John had a question for
I'm
you.
sorry.
Okay.
I'm used to
Aaron?
thanking them when they speak, so I'm sorry. I regretted back.
All right.
I don't know, Lisa, if this is gonna be a question. There may be a question involved in the statement, but I was gonna share something a little while ago. But my question would be to the extent of, when we've been given the names of the individuals who are involved with the calendar committee and who work diligently, I still think that we're missing parts of the community puzzle here. A big portion of it, you go and you're talking about the social emotional complex mind, and those families, I'm not so sure we've represented them. My question is, how have they been a part of this discussion regarding whether it be this or this, because they're going to be greatly affected? Has Centerstone or Meridian been contacted in regards to the students and the families that they represent, how it's going to have a positive or negative effect on them? Were they included at any point in this discussion? Because if we know that pushing it back is going to create a new trauma, not just to the student, but also to the family in so many different ways, have they been included? And it may be too late, but I hope it's not. Let's do it slowly so we can get there, together. But my concern is always going to be making sure that we do reach out to every component of our community. And I see that there's, in my opinion, I may be wrong, it seems like there's a gate a gap there that we haven't really.
That hearing voice. Well, I work for Centerstone, and my role is a system of care coordinator, which brings people serving and human serving agencies together monthly to talk about where are the gaps and what needs to be done. So hopefully it reassures you to know that I'm hopefully speaking on behalf of many families who I see who fall through the gaps, and who, you know, that's why I wanted to reinforce what Sayward had said, was those little ones who really need that time with their teachers and who benefit from that nurturing, stable, predictable, that, you know, healing time. That is really something that cannot be underscored in that window of opportunity for learning, especially for young elementary. So yes, definitely, thank you.
And I can vouch for Lisa. She sat with me in the calendar committee, and she oftentimes brought that up, just how it affected every student throughout our corporation, even to the point where, like, we really had a great conversation at our table about Christmas break and how it affects the food for students and those days. And so I will say she definitely represented the side that we needed on that in her role. So it was fun to have the conversation with her, because her look at it, while we all look at it that way, she did represent
Lisa,
that as well.
no, you know, bonjour. No disrespect to you, but what I'm saying is, I want that parent.
Oh,
not the professional.
I hear
I
you.
want the parent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Thank
I
you.
can help choose some of those.
Well, I
That would
think
be great.
bringing those people back, if we are tasked with bringing the committee back together next week, bringing someone from Boys and Girls Club, Girls Inc., Meridian, Centerstone, we can definitely have like a community partner component.
That's a great idea.
And I think that was also the intention of the community survey too, was to try to reach those that may not come to participate in such an environment, but you'll be heard.
Kim?
Beth Herrick.
Beth, you're welcome to stand or sit. I know you didn't hear me say that earlier.
Yeah. Choices. So nice.
Got a seat at the table.
Well, I was at the last meeting and spoke, and after that meeting, I spent a lot of time really digging in and getting a chance to listen to Ms. Sanzini's presentation at the last board meeting, where there was a lot of data. So I feel like I was not as informed as I maybe would have liked to have been, and I just think that some of that information came out after my comments. So thank you for getting that information out through the conversation, and I followed up with several of you and heard back from almost everyone. So, and I think you even shared my emails within one another. So I was trying to cover my bases, but then it was reshared. So thank you all for the good communication there and for your responses. I was really grateful for your commitment, as I said in my email, what would love to say publicly, to get community stakeholder and teacher feedback at this phase. I agree with a past commenter about always wanting to see more robust survey design. That's, as a trained psychologist, of course I'm gonna want that. And more audience segmentation and the results and analysis. But, but I'm really glad to see that. And I love the focus on supporting our educators, especially, it was so eye-opening to hear that about 50% of our teachers have less than 10 years. And with that 33% being pulled up today with less than 2 years in this report that I saw, that's just huge. I'm still concerned and want to lift this up again. I know it's been said before about the buy-in from the teacher side of things. And I don't know how many teachers there are with 308 teacher responses. And is it teacher or staff? And I don't really know how that audience would segment itself. But I wonder what percentage that is, if that's a very small percentage, if that's a larger percentage. And if there's a building breakdown for that too, like what buildings were most likely to respond. And if that, that might be telling in and of itself. this, and given that, you know, taking whether it's a critical mass or a small minority or a large percentage, you know, knowing that would then help me try to make sense of whether the 50% of teachers that want afternoon professional development versus the 25 that want morning professional, you know, like, I don't know what 308 means, and how does that then relate to the percentages you're seeing there? I love complicated problems, so this is kind of like fun to think about the pieces of the puzzle. So I'm just recognizing, like, as a remark on the process, I'll share that. But seeing also that 40% of the teachers didn't care much about the start time, rating it 1 or 2. About 40% do care much about the start times, 4 to 5, you know, rating, and then 20% gave it a 3. It's hard to make sense of that. You know, like, I don't even know. I don't have anything to offer, but I'm just like biting into what data I'm seeing today and grateful for that. But the one thing that I haven't yet heard, and this will be my last piece of feedback.
Beth, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I'll do it in one. I wonder about the resources and approach for incentivizing or encouraging mentoring within the teacher professional development shared time. Time is time, but resources might be needed too. And so that's another piece of the puzzle that is we're discussing the effectiveness of utilizing classroom minutes. How can those mentoring and professional development minutes be leveraged to be most effective too? And that might include dollars or other resource allocations, including things like buy-in from the teachers and I would hope REA as well. I'm grateful to be a part of the conversation. I'm really grateful for your service, and glad to lend my voice and hope it's useful to some degree in lifting up what I'm seeing and hearing. And
So Beth, we're gonna get you on our next calendar committee. It started next week for next year.
I don't know that you need new voices. I mean, it sounds like there's something you're returning to. So yeah, but thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Are there any of those questions that we're able to address?
Sure. On the staff survey, we had 75 Richmond High School teachers participate in the survey. We had 6 teachers from CYS. We had 17 teachers from Hibbard. We had 26 teachers from Dennis. We had 31 teachers at Test, 18 teachers at Westview, 23 teachers at Vale, 18 teachers at Star, 21 teachers at, I'm sorry, I should be saying staff, 21 staff members at Fairview, and 28 staff members at Crestdale, and then we have 20 at Charles. Then we also had 11 staff at central office complete the survey, and then some people were other because maybe they teach at multiple buildings.
And how many were other?
Pretty good response.
I would have to. Yes. And it's based on the secondary buildings having more staff, like Richmond High School having a larger staff, the 2 middle level intermediate buildings.
I mean, CYS doesn't more than 60, so that was.
Can we don't have any more? Oh, we do have one more. Okay, one more. Oh, of course.
I wrote in circles all over here, so I'm just gonna be all over the place, just a heads up. So I noticed the survey questions that one of the parent survey questions was asking.
Do you mind stating your name for?
Oh, I'm Emily Christian. I'm a mom, and I with a lot of notes, and I have 3 kids, and they're all at Hibbard, and I am CIS at the high school. Is that enough?
Perfect. Yep.
Properly labeled. All right. So I noticed that the question of what should the teacher's professional development be like, that question was left off on the response thing here, but I don't mind that so much because I was questioning why the parents were being asked what the teachers should do with their professional development time. I was kind of confused about that. and I asked a few teachers and they said it was not on their survey, so I'm just gonna reiterate. I feel like it hits different when a parent points that out, and I know Kelly brought it up, but it hits different when I'm saying, I'm not qualified to answer that question, why are you asking me that? So anyway, since it was on the survey, I do have some opinions about it, and first of all, it shouldn't have been on the question on there to begin with because it has nothing to do with the planning of the calendar. What we do at the time is not as important as when it is for the calendar. But if it was brought up that we were working to teach our new teachers to be better teachers and all of that, why is it that we keep having new teachers constantly and we're not keeping the older teachers? Maybe we should be focusing on what the teachers who have been here longer need rather than training teachers to then go someplace else and use what we've trained them to do. It's a possibility. Also, each building has different needs. So if we're worried about each individual building doing the best that they can, why are we trying to make the same box for every building to fit in? I feel like the principals should be the ones making the final decision about what their specific building needs to do. We had, I assume, hired good principals to figure this stuff out. Why don't we trust them to handle that situation? I'm looking at all my notes. Will this information be posted online somewhere? I liked having the breakdown of which building, which buildings had however many numbers of respondents. That would be really nice to just be able to come through for all parents, even the ones who can't make it tonight. And so that would be good. And knowing what percentage overall responded, because each building is a different size. So, you know, the high school might have a different percentage than an elementary school. So just knowing the percentages would be helpful. Looking at the different instructional time, we did the early release day every single day during the 2020 year, and it didn't go great. And I can tell you in elementary school, I don't know anything. I've not really worked in upper grades very long. And I can tell you that in elementary school, the first thing that goes is science and social studies and social emotional learning. And those are important things. I understand that the kids are getting tested on math and reading, and so those are the things that we need to focus on. But 1 minute, okay. So if we move essentially back on the number of hours that we have to teach our kids, what we're doing for elementary school is just saying science and social studies and social emotional learning are not important. I think that's all, but if not, you'll get an email from me later. Bye.
Thank you. All right. Okay, any questions in regards to that? Okay, board discussion. We're on to 4.01. Thoughts?
Well, I guess I have concerns with, out of the two options, option B, just because of the loss of time for elementary school based on, thanks to public commentaries and things I didn't think about, loss in the elementary time especially. Out of the two options, that one just affects elementary by 3 minutes.
Yeah, I agree. I prefer option A. We had to pick tonight. I like option B because I think it's closer to what the Tuesdays are. I think parents have figured that out. Once again.
All right. Okay. So, it sounds like, again, going back to the timeline, Jamie, you kind of were responding to that. It sounds like we're getting together. Well, go ahead, spell it out for us. We're getting together.
I think it would be most appropriate to take what looks like the finalized draft building hour proposal, to take that back to corporate discussion, to respect that process and that input. And then from that point, move it forward to the March 22nd. We are fielding quite a few, and obviously knowing that we represent our stakeholders as well, all stakeholders. We are receiving a lot of daily calls, concerns voiced that they don't know the gentleman's agreement of the time. And that's concerning because I don't want to tell my staff to say, yes, fall break's on here. That's not changed much. We did extend back Christmas break because we did hear that valued input that was a high area that was requested to move that to 10. And I just don't feel comfortable having our staff say, yeah, go ahead and schedule your spring break because I don't want to be paying that back.
And I'm just thinking timeline, if we want something on the 15th, are you gonna want that on Monday by 10 a.m. to share
I think
as
it would be
normal?
most
So which
appro-
means
I
we
think
would
it would
need to
be
meet
most
on either Thursday.
appropriate.
We have another committee meeting tomorrow afternoon. So that would only leave Friday.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of the teachers as I look at Kelly, but I would assume our membership would want the draft to review by at least that Monday.
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear. Are you now taking out the calendar committee input?
No, and that's what we're trying to say is within that timeline, if we had that, it would have to be something that was scheduled probably
Could we schedule
Monday
So
or-
here's a suggestion. Could we schedule the committee meeting on Monday? Because we also need to grab some community organizations. And so if we met on Monday afternoon and tried to work through that and then had something Tuesday to share one day prior, would that be? I just don't want to rush. And Friday afternoon since we already have a committee meeting tomorrow afternoon, I hate to push a Friday afternoon to ask teachers to stay to meet on this topic. So.
We have set the standard, the protocol, whatever, for the Monday 10 a.m.
By 10.
Under the circumstances.
Okay. The only other thing I don't know is to combine those two, because I'm trying to think.
Combine.
Patsy's on both. Maybe that's it. So maybe it would make sense to combine the input.
You mean the corporate discussion and the calendar all at once versus
probably maybe not, or just to do that first and then leave. But
with the calendar committee.
and if Kelly is advisable too, I would say that maybe the calendar committee can meet maybe hopefully Monday, as many as possible, and then provide that either late Monday or early Tuesday.
We also have parents here. I don't know if, the feedback. I know Mr. Blunt and Mrs. Felsman both served on the
We did
committee.
invite the calendar committee here this evening.
Well, if
To offer any additional input. That was something that was important because we are trying to meet all of the needs.
Right.
And so we did invite the calendar committee and also, asked any memberships who wanted to be here for that discussion. And I know we have had several that have offered that input.
And thus goes back to my initial question that I posed to Mr. Weber with regard to what is it that as a board of trustees, that are you all expecting for us as a central office, as leadership team on the 22nd? If indeed you are suggesting and preferring that we come back with a recommendation, then at that point, to Mrs. McDermott's point, as far as including the calendar committee, as well as then being respectful, taking it to corporate discussion, we may need to extend that time.
I think you guys need to do what you need to do. We can meet the 29th. We can have an emergency meeting.
Yes.
We don't have to wait till the next board meeting. We don't have to. When the calendar's done, we can meet within 3 days after that. Well,
But we could
some of
figure-
us can
we
meet
could
then.
But
We only need
can
4.
I think there is a way that if
So
we need the calendar,
flex the board meeting
Could
if we
we
need
meet
to, is what I would do.
as the calendar committee Monday, because we're not talking about building hours at that point, we're only talking about the calendar. And then we could reconvene for the building hours at a different time, so that aligns a little better with the time that we have. And that way, at least that part could be done for our community and for our staff and for our parents and for everybody that needs it.
And then the final draft go that Wednesday.
For this, and then the building hour piece come back through the process that we want and need to have. And then is that something we can consider to help alleviate the strain on the timing just from now until spring break with that being so tight? I don't know.
I guess my thought initially in hearing was that the charge was to look at both, to get input from the committee on the building hour proposal, because typically the calendar committee has just looked at the calendar.
Correct.
The reason that this became more complex is because we started looking at, is the Tuesday early dismissal the best model for professional development for our district? So what the calendar committee looked at was, what other barriers do we have? That's what then we charged our central office team to kind of come out of. So it wasn't part of their initial task.
But
I
I'd
guess
love to get them back in.
yes,
on the
but my
conversation.
thought is go ahead and do both. Still, we could, the priority can be this, but I still would like to get their input, since they initiated some concerns with those three challenges as presented tonight. I feel like getting feedback from the calendar committee on those three topics and these building hour proposals would be useful moving forward. My other question is, would you like the Ed Working Group also to be a part of that conversation? Or are you asking for me to also schedule the Ed Working Group prior to? So if you could just clarify.
You're on the Ed
I am.
Working Group. What are your thoughts?
Well, I kind of feel like the calendar committee has been very separate from the Ed Working Group. So to me, that just seems like an extra time waste to move
Could
on. You know what I mean?
any
I
of
mean,
those
we're gonna
be
hear what
combined? Like
Could
if
the
the
Ed
Ed
Working
Working Group
Group
goes to
come
the calendar group.
Sure.
To the calendar committee and just combine the two.
I mean,
Mr. Mops is on that, Mr. Weber.
yeah.
Whatever you need. I
Yeah.
don't think the ed needs to
I-
necessarily be part of it, but
I don't
I'm
think so
happy to
either,
attend.
because I
Not
feel like
necessarily.
we weren't part of the original
Yeah,
calendar committee
I'm
anyway.
comfortable with you guys doing the
I'm
work.
comfortable with you guys too.
Okay.
And the committee,
So will you
original
just
committee.
clarify
Okay.
what you would like for us to discuss at the calendar committee? Is it just the physical calendar or the building hour proposal? Like basically this entire presentation,
The
both?
calendar and the proposed time, I think.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I
too.
think the calendar, they've already kind of worked through, but maybe,
Yeah, the only
since there are a
thing
few
that would be different
changes,
is your changes
make
with
sure that,
the-
Grading periods.
grading
yes.
And I do want to circle back just to make sure, the building hour proposal was an effort to address some of the highest of concerns that we
Right.
are hearing, and that is through exit interviews, a concern as to why we are losing that staff. So it is absolutely an effort to retain the best we can, because I've often said the best way to retain or to attract is to retain. You know, we want to keep our best staff. We don't want to train them and then to lose them. That is why we are pointing out the percentages and the data, because we do understand that there are things that are barriers to the learning environment, and we are trying to help aid that, whether it be safety, behavioral intervention. We are trying to address that all encompassing with just the calendar. And other things are,
And Dawn, will this survey stay open, and could we have another push to say if any other teachers or community members, social media wise or whatever? I know we've gotten some messages that said, oh, I didn't know about it. I know it's been advertised quite a bit, but can we still push
Sure.
that so that the calendar committee may have more data?
And I know Mrs. Hazelbaker pushed last night, and we had definite increase in the community stakeholders. I think the teacher staff remained relatively close, but we definitely had over 50 parents
Great.
completed it. So
Great.
yes, we can leave that open.
So yes, we'll be you guys will be convening with the entire calendar committee.
Okay.
And working on both of those two priorities. And then we'll be convening on March 22nd.
Okay.
Hopefully with a proposal at that time. Again, this is a Herculean task, is that what you said, John, the last time?
And John's available to meet on the 29th.
So at
Okay.
at a minimum, the calendar, Mrs.
I can
Stoltz,
meet.
but if we could have the entire proposal, but at a minimum, you'd like to take board
Yes.
action on the calendar? Okay.
I'm hearing that that's what the board is wanting. Is that right? Yes?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, yep. All right, thank you guys for, we've bombarded you with questions, appreciate that. Thank you guys, out there with, you guys have been patient too, and we appreciate the input, so. All right, without further ado, I will, consider this meeting adjourned, thank you.
Be careful saying that.